Steel clashes and a herald's cry echoes across a crowded courtyard. You stand at the heart of the Burgundian Duchy, a realm of unimaginable wealth and whispered conspiracies, where the truth was often buried with its dukes. Official histories tell us of battles and treaties, but they ignore the shadows, the stories deemed too strange or dangerous to record. We are about to unearth 25 of those forgotten tales, pulling back the velvet curtain on a world of vanished treasures, ghostly armies, and coded messages that could have changed the course of history. By the end of this journey, you will possess a secret understanding of this glittering, doomed state that no textbook can offer. We will investigate a crown that disappeared from a locked room and a prophecy that foretold the duchy's fall from a single blighted flower. What hidden force truly decides the fate of empires? That legendary feast of 1454 was meant to be the pinnacle of Duke Philip the Good's power. In a hall ablaze with 1,000 candles, the air thick with the scent of spiced wine and roasted meats, all eyes were meant to be drawn to the centerpiece of his authority, his crown. It was a masterpiece of gold, so heavily encrusted with rubies, sapphires, and pearls that it was said to weigh as much as a small child. But at the height of the celebration, as minstrels played and nobles toasted, the unthinkable happened. The crown, which had been displayed on a velvet cushion for all to admire, simply vanished. The cushion remained indented and empty. Panic erupted. Guards sealed the doors. Every guest, every servant, every courtier was subjected to a frantic and humiliating search. The ducal treasury was turned inside out, yet the crown was gone. In the days that followed, suspicion fell on everyone. Several courtiers were accused, their rooms ransacked and their lives ruined by the mere whisper of involvement, though no proof was ever found. The most persistent rumor, the one that has echoed through the centuries, claims the crown never left the hall that night. It was not carried out in a bag or beneath a cloak. The story goes that a clever thief, perhaps with an inside accomplice, hid the priceless object in a wagon filled with hay meant for the ducal stables. The wagon rolled out of the castle gates under the very noses of the guards, its precious cargo bouncing away into the night, never to be seen again. The political implications of this loss were catastrophic. A duke's crown was not merely jewelry, it was the very symbol of his right to rule, a tangible object that commanded loyalty and projected divine favor. Its absence was a spiritual wound to Philip's authority, a sign of vulnerability that his enemies would have been all too eager to exploit. For centuries, theories about its fate have abounded. Some believe it was broken apart, its gems sold individually on the black markets of Europe to fund some forgotten war or conspiracy. Others whisper it was hidden by the Duke's own agents to prevent its capture in a conflict he saw coming, and the location died with them. A more romantic notion suggests it rests at the bottom of a deep well on former Burgundian lands, or lies concealed within a forgotten compartment in the walls of a crumbling chateau, waiting for a lucky soul to stumble upon the greatest lost treasure of the 15th century. While the crown's disappearance shook the world above, a deeper secret lay buried beneath the very streets of the capital. The Dijon catacombs form a labyrinth of tunnels and forgotten chambers, a dark mirror to the glittering city overhead. Officially, they were a practical solution, a place to house the bones from overcrowded cemeteries. But the legends that cling to those damp limestone walls tell a far more intriguing story. Whispers persist that these passages were used for more than just storing the dead. They speak of heretical meetings held by candlelight where dissenting voices plotted against the ducal orthodoxy. Some tales even suggest that fleeing Knights Templar, after their order's suppression, used these tunnels as a temporary refuge, perhaps even hiding a fragment of their legendary treasure deep within the earth. The most tangible evidence of this hidden history is not gold or jewels, but the walls themselves. They are covered in strange, coded graffiti, a chaotic tapestry of symbols, geometric patterns, and unfamiliar scripts carved by unknown hands over centuries. Scholars have puzzled over these markings for generations. Are they simple mason's signs, the devotional scribbles of secretive cults, or perhaps a complex map pointing to something still concealed? The code, if it even is one, remains stubbornly undeciphered. This presents a silent, stone-bound mystery. Each mysterious carving is a voice from the shadows of Burgundian history, a direct challenge to the official record. They suggest a secret city thriving below the capital, a world of clandestine beliefs and hidden agendas that the dukes above could not or would not control. What truths might we learn if we could only understand the language of those silent walls? But the whispers from the catacombs were not the only omens haunting the dukes. Above ground, in the polished halls of the court, a different kind of shadow was cast, one born from a single, chilling sentence. An obscure prophecy, whispered to have been uttered by a court astrologer, foretold that the fall of Burgundy would not arrive with the clash of armies but from a blight upon the rose. To understand the sheer terror this would have inspired, you must first appreciate the rose's significance. It was not just a flower, it was the very emblem of the duchy, a symbol of its divine right to rule and its legendary wealth. The Burgundian rose appeared on tapestries, coins, and the personal seals of the dukes themselves. It represented a lineage in full, magnificent bloom. So a prophecy targeting the rose was not a prediction of a bad harvest, it was a direct assault on the soul of the state. The alleged prophecy gained a terrifying and precise meaning decades later with the sudden death of Duke Charles the Bold. He left no male heir, only a single daughter, Mary. This was the blight. The pure, direct line of the Valois dukes was broken. Through Mary's marriage, the entire Burgundian inheritance passed to the House of Habsburg. The magnificent rose of Burgundy was effectively grafted onto a foreign stem, its unique identity slowly subsumed by a vast empire. This raises a profound historical debate. Was the prophecy a genuine prediction, a startlingly accurate glimpse into the future by a keen observer of court politics who saw the fragility of the ducal line? Or was it a brilliant piece of post hoc storytelling, crafted after the fact to make sense of a catastrophic, unpredictable event? Inventing a prophecy gives chaos a narrative, making a random tragedy feel like fate. It provides a comforting, if grim, explanation for why a mighty duchy could simply vanish from the map. The power of the story lies in this very ambiguity. Whether true foresight or clever fabrication, the tale of the blighted rose perfectly encapsulates the poignant vulnerability of Burgundy, a realm so glorious that its eventual fall seemed to require a prophecy to explain it. The fear of a blighted rose gave way to a more visceral terror on the battlefield. After the smoke cleared at Morat, victorious Swiss soldiers began telling a story their commanders did not want recorded. They spoke of an enemy that emerged from the lakeside mists long after the fighting had ended, a ghost army of Burgundians marching in perfect, silent formation. Their banners were torn, their faces were pale, and they made no sound as they advanced. These were not the desperate stragglers of a routed force, they were phantoms replaying their final march in a spectral loop. The sheer consistency of these accounts across different Swiss cantons is what makes them so compelling. This was not one frightened sentry's tale, it was a shared experience reported by numerous hardened men. So what did these soldiers truly see? One rational explanation points to the psychology of extreme stress. The Battle of Morat was a brutal, bloody affair, a decisive defeat for the ambitious Charles the Bold. Men who had fought for hours, exhausted and adrenalized, staring into a thick fog, could have easily misinterpreted shadows and sounds. Their brains, expecting another attack, might have constructed the very threat they feared most, a final, ghostly charge from the fallen enemy. Another, more cynical, theory suggests this was deliberate propaganda. By spreading tales of a phantom host, the Swiss could embellish their victory. making it seem so complete and divinely favored that even the dead Burgundians could not accept their defeat. It served as a powerful psychological tool to intimidate future foes and glorify their own military prowess. Yet, the ghost army of Murat endures because it fits a pattern seen at other tragic sites throughout history. These stories often arise from places of immense sudden loss, as if the land itself records a final, traumatic moment. The silent soldiers are not attacking, they are merely repeating, trapped in the final seconds of their destiny. This transforms the tale from a simple battlefield anecdote into something far deeper, a folk tale that grapples with the profound weight of mass death. It asks us whether a tragedy of such magnitude can ever truly be over, or if it leaves an echo that sensitive observers might occasionally perceive. The Phantom March at Murat remains an open question, a mystery suspended between collective trauma and the unexplainable. While phantom armies haunted the battlefields, a more tangible conspiracy was being woven in the quiet of a duchess's private chambers. Margaret of York, sister to 2 English kings and wife to Charles the Bold, was a master of a different kind of shadow play, one conducted with ink and cipher. In an era where every messenger could be intercepted and every parchment read by prying eyes, her survival and political influence depended on secrecy. Her tool was a complex substitution cipher, a code that transformed plain words into baffling sequences of symbols and numbers. To any outsider, her letters would have appeared as meaningless scribbles, perhaps financial accounts or mundane lists. But to her correspondents in England, loyalists to the Yorkist cause against the rising Tudors, these pages contained dangerous instructions and vital intelligence. The methods of medieval cryptography were ingenious in their simplicity. Margaret likely used a cipher wheel or a pre-agreed cipher key, where each letter of the alphabet was systematically replaced by another character or number. The key to breaking such a code was frequency analysis, studying the message to see which symbols appeared most often, as they would correspond to common letters like E or T. Yet a clever codemaker would add null characters, symbols that meant nothing, or deliberately misspell words to throw off any would-be cryptanalyst. We know the power of her secret network because a few of these messages were eventually decoded. They reveal a duchess deeply enmeshed in plots to unseat Henry VII, funneling Burgundian money and support to pretenders like Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, who claimed the English throne. Her decoded letters are cold, precise, and fiercely political, showing a mind constantly calculating the risks to her family's legacy. This leads to the most tantalizing possibility. Historians suspect that the vast majority of Margaret's secret correspondence has never been read. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of her encoded letters are believed to lie undisturbed in dusty archive boxes across Europe, their seals still unbroken. They are silent, waiting. What truths do they hold? Did she reveal the locations of hidden Yorkist treasures, or name powerful nobles still secretly loyal to her cause? The unread cipher of Margaret of York represents one of history's great locked doors. Behind it could lie not just the secrets of a failed rebellion, but a completely alternate understanding of how power truly flowed in the fragile final years of the Burgundian state. Deep in the wine-scented cellars of the Hôtel Dieu in Beaune, a different, more sinister aroma began to permeate the ancient stone. This was the domain of a man known only as Maître Henry, an alchemist granted the personal patronage of the ducal court. His mission was as audacious as it was simple, to transmute base metals into pure gold, thereby filling the duchy's coffers with self-made wealth. Locals whispered of the unsettling symphony that echoed from his sealed workshop, the constant bubbling of alembics, the hiss of bellows, and the clinking of glass vessels. The air around the hospital was often thick with the acrid smell of sulfur and mercury, odors that clung to clothes and lingered in the throat, a testament to experiments that defied the natural order. Then, as abruptly as he had arrived, Maître Henry vanished. The ducal guards sent to check on his progress found the cellar door unlocked. inside, the scene was one of suspended animation. Crucibles sat cold on furnaces, parchments covered in astrological diagrams and complex formulae were scattered across a workbench, and a single, half-empty cup of wine suggested a departure in great haste. There was no sign of a struggle, no farewell note, simply an absence. The only thing of apparent value left behind was a single, small gold nugget resting in the center of his main worktable. When assayed by the Duke's own goldsmiths, its purity was declared unnaturally perfect, a quality never found in nature or achieved by the minting technology of the age. The discovery spawned endless questions. Was the nugget proof of a miraculous success, a solitary triumph left behind as a cryptic calling card? Or was it a brilliant forgery, the key prop in an elaborate ruse that allowed the alchemist to flee with his advance payments before his deception was uncovered? Perhaps the most haunting theory is that he did succeed, but the knowledge or the process itself was so dangerous, so volatile, that it forced him to disappear for his own safety, leaving behind a single, silent piece of evidence. That one perfect piece of gold remains a paradox, a physical object that offers no real answers. It is both proof of a potential miracle and the cornerstone of a magnificent fraud, a tiny, gleaming enigma from the Burgundian shadows that challenges everything we think we know about the possible and the impossible. The alchemist's perfect gold nugget was not the only treasure that slipped through the duchy's fingers into the realm of legend. From the workshops of Arras, the most celebrated tapestry weaving center in all of Europe, emerged a masterpiece destined for the court of Charles the Bold. Commissioned to celebrate his marriage to Margaret of York, this was no ordinary wall hanging. It was a monumental visual history, a woven chronicle depicting the entire legendary lineage of the Burgundian dukes stretching back to mythic origins. More than just art, it was a powerful piece of political propaganda designed to solidify Charles's legitimacy and divine right to rule for all his noble guests to see. The tragedy occurred during its transport by sea, when the vessel carrying it was caught in a sudden, violent storm off the coast of Zealand. The ship, along with its priceless cargo, was swallowed by the waves. While the loss of such a magnificent object was a cultural catastrophe, the legends that grew from its loss are even more intriguing. Persistent rumors suggest the tapestry held a secret. Woven into the intricate borders of the ducal family tree were supposedly subtle clues, heraldic anomalies or hidden figures that pointed to the existence of a lost or illegitimate bloodline, a branch of the family the dukes wished to both commemorate and conceal. Its loss at sea ensured this potential secret would remain forever submerged. Yet, the story of a suppressed history does not end in the cold depths of the North Sea. In the silent scriptorium of Citox Abbey, a monk was committing a different kind of truth to parchment. His chronicle was a detailed, eyewitness account of life at the Burgundian court, but it was allegedly suppressed on the direct orders of the Duke's Chamberlain. The official reason given was that it detailed the unnatural vices of the court, a vague but damning phrase that could cover anything from personal scandals to accusations of heresy or treasonous plots. The manuscript was ordered burned, and the monk was reportedly transferred to a remote monastery, his voice silenced. The hunt for these two lost artifacts has never truly ceased. For the tapestry, marine archaeologists occasionally scan the seabed where the ship is believed to have foundered, hoping the salt water preserved the woven threads in the anaerobic clay. For the monk's chronicle, the quest is one for fragments. Historians and treasure hunters alike scour the archives of old monastic libraries across Europe, searching for any surviving copy or even a single page that may have been smuggled out before the destruction order. They look for anonymous manuscripts, for texts bound into the covers of later books, any scrap of writing that matches the described tone and content. The enduring fascination with these two objects lies in what they represent, a perfect duality of Burgundian power. One was a public declaration of glorious manufactured history, the other a private record of shameful hidden truth. The loss of one and the suppression of the other created two identical voids in our understanding, leaving us to wonder if we will ever truly know the full story of the duchy that glittered so brightly and burned out so fast. Far from the gilded halls of court, ducal power cast a different kind of shadow over the dark, silent expanse of the Morvan forest. In a remote highland village, the trial records from the year 1482 tell a story that seems to belong more to folklore than to a legal archive. They detail the case of a local woodcutter, a man named Pierre, accused of a monstrous crime, not of theft or murder, but of being a werewolf. The charge was that he had been shape-shifting into a wolf to terrorize the Duke's personal game preserves, slaughtering prized deer that were strictly off-limits to commoners. The trial procedures were a chilling blend of rustic superstition and formal ducal law. The local bailiff, representing the Duke's authority, presided, but the evidence presented was entirely spectral. Witnesses testified to seeing a wolf with human eyes or finding Pierre asleep in the woods, exhausted, at the very spot where a wolf had been seen moments before. One account claimed he had a wound on his arm that perfectly matched a cut found on a wolf's paw. The court took this circumstantial testimony with grave seriousness. What does this bizarre case truly reveal? On one level, it is a window into the deep, primal fears of medieval rural life. The forest was a place of genuine danger and mystery, where the line between man and beast could blur in the moonlight. A series of livestock killings, or in this case, poaching in the ducal preserve, required an explanation that made sense within that worldview, and a werewolf was a terrifyingly logical culprit. But the trial also demonstrates the surprising reach of the ducal legal system, even into the most isolated communities. The Duke's law protected his property, his hunting grounds, with absolute severity. By trying Pierre for lycanthropy, the local court was not just addressing a village panic, it was enforcing the Duke's exclusive rights over the land. The woodcutter became a convenient scapegoat for a crime against the state, his alleged transformation into a beast serving as a perfect metaphor for the savage punishment that awaited any who threatened the Duke's assets. This case forces us to ask, was Pierre a man suffering from a mental illness misunderstood by his neighbors, or was he a clever poacher whose ruse was uncovered and then twisted into a supernatural narrative by authorities eager to make a brutal example? The records are silent on his ultimate fate, but the accusation itself echoes through time. It reminds us that in the Burgundian state, the law could wear many faces, from the complex cipher of a duchess to the primal fear of a beast lurking in the Duke's own woods. The same shadows that haunted the woods now reached directly into the ducal dining hall. In 1471, Duchess Isabel of Portugal collapsed into a violent and terrifying illness immediately after drinking from a ceremonial goblet during a state banquet. Her symptoms were swift and severe, convulsions and a fever so high it was said her skin was hot to the touch. The court physicians were baffled, whispering one dreaded word among themselves: poison. The investigation that followed was swift and wide, pointing to several compelling suspects. The most obvious was a disgruntled courtier whose family had lost lands and title after a dispute with the Duchess, a man with a clear motive for revenge. Others whispered of a foreign agent, perhaps from France, aiming to destabilize Burgundy by removing the Duke's influential and politically astute wife. Yet, just as the inquiry was gaining momentum, Duke Philip the Good himself intervened and ordered all proceedings to stop. The case was closed, officially unsolved, and the matter was never spoken of in court again. This abrupt halt is the real heart of the mystery. Why would a powerful duke, whose wife had nearly died, silence the hunt for her attacker? One theory suggests Philip discovered the culprit was someone too powerful or too close to him to punish without causing a catastrophic scandal, perhaps even a member of his own family. Exposing the plot publicly could have shattered the carefully constructed image of ducal unity and invited open rebellion. Another, more tragic possibility is that the poisoning was not an assassination attempt at all, but a terrible accident. The goblet itself, a magnificent work of gold and enamel, could have been improperly cleaned or sealed. Metallic salts from its lining, or even a toxic residue from a previous ceremonial use, might have leached into the wine, creating a poison without a poisoner. Duke Philip may have halted the inquiry to cover up a humiliating and deadly error by his own household staff, an act of negligence that almost killed the Duchess. The truth died with the Duke, leaving only a single chilling question. Was the Duchess of Burgundy the target of a sinister plot that was quietly buried to protect the state? Or was she the victim of a mundane kitchen accident that had to be dressed in the clothes of a grand conspiracy to save the Duke's pride? The goblet, likely melted down and lost to time, holds the only answer. Within the very walls of the ducal palace in Dijon, behind the tapestries and under the flagstones, lay a city within a city. Legends speak of a hidden network of passages, narrow staircases concealed within thick walls, and listening posts carved behind ornate wall panels. These were not mere service corridors, they were the arteries of intrigue, used for everything from the Duke's private movements to clandestine romantic liaisons that could topple noble houses. But their most vital function was espionage, allowing the Duke's own agents to listen to the unfiltered conversations of his courtiers and foreign ambassadors. The stories gained credibility when, during renovations centuries later, workers uncovered a small, forgotten door behind a crumbling section of plaster. It opened onto a tight, dusty staircase that descended into darkness, a physical confirmation of the whispered tales. One story in particular stands out, a tale of a spy who ventured into that darkness and never returned. He was a low-level clerk in the chancery, a man with sharp ears and a talent for being unnoticed. He had learned of a plot, a treasonous agreement between a powerful Burgundian count and a representative of the French crown to overthrow the Duke. The meeting to finalize the details was to be held in the count's private chambers. Knowing he could not be seen, the clerk slipped into the hidden passages, navigating the labyrinth by memory to a specific listening post that opened into the chamber's fireplace. He overheard everything, the entire damning plan. His mission was to take this information directly to the Duke's spymaster. He was seen entering the passage by a single trusted guard. He was never seen again. The official explanation was that he must have gotten lost in the impossibly complex network, eventually succumbing to thirst in the eternal darkness. But his body was never found, and no search party ever reported discovering a new skeleton in the tunnels. This raises a chilling alternative. What if the spy was not lost but was discovered? The plotters, perhaps alerted by a careless noise or a betraying shadow, could have found him. His disappearance then becomes the perfect crime, a way to silence the one man who could expose their treason without leaving a body as evidence. Or, even more darkly, what if the spymaster himself was involved in the plot? The clerk, believing he was carrying vital information to his master, may have instead been walking directly into a trap, delivering his own death warrant. The empty passage becomes a metaphor for the ultimate fate of inconvenient truths in the Burgundian court, swallowed by the very architecture designed to protect its secrets. But the palace walls were not the only structures that kept dangerous secrets. For the most elite men in the duchy, the greatest honor came with its own whispered peril. The Order of the Golden Fleece was the pinnacle of Burgundian chivalry, a brotherhood of the bravest and most loyal knights, founded by Duke Philip the Good to secure the allegiance of his powerful nobles. Its symbol, a lavish golden ram pendant hanging from a jeweled collar, was meant to be a beacon of virtue and divine favor. Yet a persistent legend speaks of one specific ram, one particular ornament that was said to carry a terrible curse. This was not the official badge bestowed by the Duke, but a separate, exquisitely crafted piece, rumored to have been a personal gift from a foreign prince with a grudge. The story claims that this specific golden fleece brought nothing but misfortune to any knight who came to possess it. The curse allegedly began with the knight who first accepted it, a man renowned for his courage and skill in tournaments. Within a year of adding the cursed ram to his collection, he met his end not in glorious combat, but in a pointless skirmish over a disputed strip of farmland, struck down by a common foot soldier's stray arrow. The ram then passed to his son, who inherited his father's title and, unknowingly, his fate. This knight, a close companion to Duke Charles the Bold, perished beside him at the disastrous Battle of Nancy, his body never recovered from the field. The pattern seemed to repeat with chilling consistency. A third owner, a powerful count who had schemed to acquire the piece, died suddenly of a fever just weeks before he was to lead a crucial military campaign. In every case, the possession of this specific ornament appeared to precede an untimely and often ignoble death. The curse seemed to culminate with the final holder of the ram. According to the legend, it was in the possession of a knight who, at the moment of the duchy's final collapse, chose loyalty to the French crown over his Burgundian oath. He survived the political upheaval, but his family line died out within 2 generations, his lands and titles scattered to the winds. The story forces a difficult question. Was this truly a supernatural affliction, a malevolent force woven into the gold itself? Or was the curse a much more human invention, a story crafted by the Order's enemies, or even by rival knights within the Brotherhood to explain a string of tragic coincidences? In a world governed by faith and omens, the mere belief in a curse could be a powerful weapon. A knight who feared the ram might enter battle with a moment's hesitation, a fatal split second of doubt planted by the rumor. The legend of the cursed fleece endures because it offers a darkly poetic symmetry. The very symbol of the duchy's strength, a golden ram, becomes the vessel for its undoing, a glittering poison that traveled through the highest ranks of its society. It makes you wonder if the downfall of Burgundy was not just a matter of armies and politics, but perhaps, in the minds of its people, a fate sealed by a cursed piece of gold. Even the most sacred sites could become battlegrounds for influence. In the quiet abbey of Fontenay, a humble nun named Jean experienced a vision of the Virgin Mary, who showed her a dry, rocky crevice in the abbey's garden. The very next day, a spring of clear water began to flow from that exact spot. This in itself was a marvel, but the miracles had only just begun. Almost immediately, pilgrims who bathed in or drank from the spring reported being cured of ailments from blindness to crippling joint pain. The water was declared holy, and a torrent of the faithful descended upon the once tranquil abbey. This sudden fame created an immense problem for the established church authorities. The local bishops had not sanctioned this new holy site. They saw the cult of the spring as a direct challenge to their control over religious devotion, and just as importantly, the lucrative flow of pilgrimage donations. They dispatched investigators to declare the nun a fraud and the miracles fabrications, but they were met by a wall of fervent belief from the common people. The spring's popularity became an act of defiance in itself, a grassroots faith that bypassed the official channels of the church. It was a spiritual rebellion, proving that the divine could speak directly through a lowly nun and a patch of wet ground, unsettling the entire religious hierarchy. That same spirit of defiance took a political form in the fortified town of Auxonne. In 1465, with his treasury strained by constant warfare, Duke Charles the Bold demanded an extraordinary war tax from his cities. The mayor of Auxonne, a shrewd and stubborn man named Robert de Chalons, looked at the ducal order and refused. He flatly declared that the town's charter, granted by Charles's own father, protected them from such unjust levies. This was not just disobedience, it was a direct and public challenge to the Duke's absolute authority. Charles, known for his fiery temper, was predictably enraged. He marched a contingent of his personal guard to the town's gates, expecting a swift and humiliating surrender. But Robert did not open the gates. Instead, he mobilized the town's militia, and a tense standoff began. For 3 days, the Duke's army sat outside the walls while the townspeople stood defiantly upon them. Then, just as suddenly as his anger had flared, Charles the Bold withdrew his troops and issued a full pardon to the mayor. The official decree praised Robert's dedication to the rule of law, but no one at court believed that for a moment. The sudden reversal sparked wild rumors. Some whispered that the mayor possessed damning evidence of a secret shame in the Duke's past, a letter or a witness he threatened to reveal. Others suggested Robert was not a rebel at all, but a secret loyalist playing a deeper game, and his defiance was a staged performance to make Charles appear merciful and just to his other restless cities. The truth of the pardon died with the two men, but the story of the mayor who stared down the most powerful duke in Europe and won remains a powerful testament to the fact that even absolute rulers could be checked, not always by armies, but by a single person's courage and a well-kept secret. A lavishly decorated barge drifted silently into view on the Saône River one morning in 1480. It was a vessel fit for a duke, its woodwork gleaming with fresh gilt and its silken banners hanging limp in the dawn air. Yet as the people of Lyon drew closer, a profound unease settled over them. The deck was crowded with figures, but they were utterly still. The ship was crewed not by men, but by finely crafted mannequins, each one dressed in the extravagant silks and velvets of a Burgundian courtier. They were posed in scenes of revelry, some holding frozen goblets, others locked in silent conversation. There was no pilot, no oarsmen, just this ghost ship carrying its silent, mocking court downstream. The only clue to this bizarre spectacle was a single parchment nailed to the main mast. It bore a cryptic message, a short Latin phrase that translated to, "The wisest fools hold the deepest silence." Interpretations of this strange event exploded across the region. The most popular theory pointed to a rival French lord, perhaps one humiliated by the Burgundian court's notorious extravagance. This would have been an elaborate and deeply poetic insult, a floating satire meant to portray the entire ducal court as a collection of empty-headed mannequins, beautiful to look at but utterly soulless and incapable of real action, drifting aimlessly toward their own ruin. The message reinforced this, suggesting that the so-called wisdom of the court was merely a profound and foolish silence in the face of their own decadence. But another, more unsettling, reading suggests the ship was not an external attack but an internal critique. Could a disaffected Burgundian noble, someone who had witnessed the court's spiraling spending and political blindness firsthand, have orchestrated this? It would have been an act of tremendous courage and risk, a way to hold up a mirror to the Duke and his inner circle, showing them the hollow pageantry their rule had become, all while maintaining the plausible deniability of that single enigmatic message. The ship was a statement that could not be easily punished because its meaning was just ambiguous enough, yet its visual impact was devastatingly clear. This phantom vessel challenges our understanding of political dissent in this era. It was not a rebellious army or a treasonous letter, but a piece of performance art, a symbolic act that weaponized ridicule. It forced everyone who saw it or heard of it to question the very nature of the power and prestige that Burgundy projected to the world. Were they witnessing a glorious court or merely a ship of fools, adrift on the current of history and heading inevitably for a fall? The barge itself eventually vanished, but the question it carried down the river remains unanswered, a silent, mocking echo from the duchy's final, frantic years. Even a duke could not be in two places at once, yet the chronicles insist it happened. In the tense years before his brutal assassination, multiple witnesses swore they had seen John the Fearless in the streets of Dijon, reviewing troops, while other, equally reliable sources placed him at a crucial political meeting in Paris on that exact same day. These were not vague sightings in the fog. They were detailed accounts from merchants and minor nobles who would have recognized the Duke's face, his distinctive gait, and the famous diamond brooch he always wore. The reports created an impossible contradiction, a historical glitch that has never been satisfactorily explained. One compelling theory points to a deliberate security measure. John the Fearless was a man who lived under the constant shadow of the axe, his life perpetually threatened by his French rivals and internal enemies. Employing a body double would have been a masterstroke of practical espionage. A carefully chosen lookalike, dressed in the Duke's clothes and trained to mimic his mannerisms, could be used as a decoy for public appearances, drawing potential assassins away from the real Duke as he traveled by a different, secret route. This would make the doppelganger not a ghost but a weapon, a living shield designed to confound his enemies and ensure his survival. Yet, if this was the case, why is there no record of such a double in the ducal accounts? No payment to an actor or a loyal servant for such a dangerous duty. This absence fuels an alternative explanation that the doppelganger was a creature of the political rumor mill. In an age of slow communication and high stakes, misinformation was a potent tool. Supporters of the Duke, or perhaps the Duke's own spymasters, could have deliberately planted stories of his presence in Dijon to mask his true, clandestine journey to Paris for a meeting he needed to keep utterly secret. By creating confusion about his whereabouts, they controlled the narrative, making his movements unpredictable and his intentions opaque to his foes. The doppelganger, in this light, was not a man of flesh and blood, but a phantom of propaganda. But what if the mystery runs deeper than deception? The consistency and detail of the eyewitness accounts from both cities are difficult to dismiss entirely. Could there be a third, more obscure explanation lost to time, perhaps involving a previously unknown twin brother or a secret pact that allowed for such an inexplicable phenomenon? The doppelganger of John the Fearless forces us to confront the very nature of historical truth. Do we trust the cold, incomplete official record, or the persistent, haunting whispers of those who were there, who swore they saw what should have been impossible? In the shadowy world of Burgundian power, even a man's own identity could become a weapon, a rumor, or a riddle waiting to be solved. While phantom dukes walked the earth, the greatest collection of their knowledge simply vanished. The personal library of the Burgundian rulers was a treasure rivaling their gold, a vast and carefully curated assembly of wisdom and wonder. It was said to contain not just common religious texts and chronicles, but also ancient philosophical manuscripts thought lost to the world, detailed maps charting lands far beyond the edge of any known European chart, and encrypted treatises on subjects considered forbidden by the Church. This was the intellectual soul of the duchy, a physical manifestation of its ambition to be a center of learning as well as power. When the duchy finally collapsed and was absorbed by France, this library did not find a new home. It was systematically dismantled. The collection was scattered, its priceless volumes sold off individually, used as packing material for more mundane goods, or simply left to rot in damp attics by new owners who could not read their Latin and Greek scripts. The destruction was so thorough it feels intentional, a cultural erasure as final as any military defeat. The loss of those maps is a particular tragedy. Imagine a chart that showed the coast of a new world decades before Columbus sailed, based on Viking sagas or Arab trader secrets the dukes had acquired. Or consider the forbidden knowledge, which could have ranged from early scientific theories on anatomy that challenged church doctrine to complex alchemical formulas far beyond the failed experiments of Mater Henry. What breakthroughs in medicine or astronomy were delayed because those pages were used to stuff a crack in a wall or light a fire? Modern historians and bibliophiles are now engaged in a global treasure hunt, a slow and painstaking effort to reassemble this lost library from the echoes it left behind. Their method is forensic. They scour auction house catalogs and digitized archives from monasteries across Europe, searching for manuscripts with the distinctive Burgundian binding or the marginal notes of a ducal librarian. Every time they find a book with the Duke's ex libris, his personal bookplate, it is like recovering a single piece of a shattered mosaic. The ultimate goal is not just to possess these objects, but to read them as a coherent collection, to understand the mind of a state through the books its rulers chose to keep. What pattern emerges when you line up a treatise on siege warfare next to a book of Persian poetry? The potential secrets these recovered texts may hold are immense. One recently identified manuscript on architecture was found to have cryptic notes in the margin describing a network of tunnels beneath a specific chateau, a potential hidden vault that has never been excavated. Another, a bestiary, contained a painted illustration of a creature so bizarre it matches no known animal, suggesting the artist was working from a description of something truly unknown. The Lost Library is therefore not just a collection of old books. It is a ghost in the world of ideas, a missing key that could unlock our understanding of everything from medieval science to the true, global reach of Burgundian influence. Each volume that remains lost is a door still closed, a silent story waiting for its chance to be read aloud once more. High above the city of Dijon, the great bell of Notre Dame was more than just bronze and wood. To the people below, it was the conscience of the duchy itself, a divine witness to the promises of its rulers. The legend was simple and terrifying. The bell would crack and fall silent whenever a duke broke a solemn oath. This was not a quiet, subtle crack, but a deep, structural flaw that would render the massive bell mute until it could be repaired, a process that could take months. The first and most famous incident coincided with Duke John the Fearless. He had sworn a sacred oath to uphold the peace with the Armagnac faction in France, a pledge made before his entire court and the clergy. Yet, in secret, he continued to fund raids and sow discord against his rivals. It was on the very night reports reached Dijon of a particularly brutal attack orchestrated by his agents that the great bell, tolling for evening prayers, split with a sound like thunder. It fell silent for nearly a year. The correlation was too precise for the populace to ignore. His public vow of peace was shattered, and so was the bell that had heard it. Decades later, his grandson, Charles the Bold, provided the legend with its most dramatic proof. Before launching his ambitious campaign to carve a kingdom from Lorraine, Charles stood before the same church and vowed to respect the ancient rights and privileges of the city of Dijon, swearing he would not levy excessive taxes for his wars. But as his military fortunes waned and his treasury emptied, he broke that promise, imposing a crushing new war tax. The very next morning, the bell failed to ring for matins. Upon inspection, a new hairline fracture was discovered running from its lip halfway up its side. It did not ring again until after his death at the Battle of Nancy. So how do we separate historical event from powerful folklore? The documented repairs to the Notre Dame bell do, in fact, align with these periods of political turmoil and broken promises. The town chronicles note funds being allocated for bell repairs following both of these specific incidents. The legend provided a moral framework for the people, a way to hold their nearly absolute rulers accountable to a higher power. When a duke's word proved worthless, the very voice of God in the city would refuse to speak. This transforms the bell from an object of superstition into a powerful symbol of the social contract. Its silence was not just a malfunction, it was a public rebuke, a tangible sign that the bond between ruler and ruled had been fractured. The sound of its daily toll was the sound of order and trust, and when that sound ceased, the entire city felt the weight of that broken vow. In a world without a free press or public elections, the cracked bell became the people's witness, their proof that a promise to them was a promise heard by heaven. A deep, unnatural silence fell over the Côte d'Or hills when the Duke's soldiers arrived not to protect the region's most productive silver mine, but to seal it forever. The entrance was blocked with tons of rubble and earth, the workers were dismissed with a pittance, and the entire operation was erased from the official ledgers as if it had never existed. This was not the closure of a depleted vein. The mine was still yielding rich ore, a steady stream of wealth flowing directly into the ducal treasury. So why bury a source of such power? The most chilling theory is that the miners broke through a wall and found something terrible, perhaps a cavern containing a prehistoric plague strain preserved in the cold, dry air, or evidence of a geological fault that threatened to poison the entire region's water supply if digging continued. Another possibility is that the mine uncovered a secret far more valuable than silver, a strategic deposit of a different material, something like high-quality saltpeter for gunpowder, that the Duke needed to keep hidden from his enemies until he could secure its extraction for himself. The abruptness of the closure suggests a decision made in panic, a reaction to a discovery so alarming that the only safe course was to bury the truth under a mountain of dirt and official silence. That same sense of impending doom manifested in a different way in the small chapel at Chatelain. There, a simple wooden statue of the Virgin Mary, carved by a local artisan, began to weep. But these were not tears of clear moisture. Witnesses swore the liquid was thick and red, like blood, tracing slow, sorrowful paths down the Madonna's painted cheeks. The phenomenon was not a one-time event. It occurred repeatedly in the years leading up to the duchy's collapse, drawing crowds of the faithful and the fearful. The local priest documented the occurrences, noting the tears only appeared during times of great political stress, when rumors of war with France were at their peak. The church, skeptical as always, sent investigators who could find no evidence of a hoax, no hidden tubes or clever mechanisms. They left baffled, unable to explain what the villagers saw with their own eyes. So was this a divine omen, a celestial warning of the bloodshed and sorrow about to engulf the land? Or does the answer lie in the material world, in the wood itself and the environment of the chapel? Certain types of resin-saturated wood can, under specific conditions of humidity and temperature, exude a reddish fluid that closely resembles blood. The emotional state of the observers, already steeped in anxiety and dread, would have done the rest, interpreting a natural, if rare, phenomenon as a supernatural sign. These two mysteries, one buried in the earth and the other displayed in a chapel, represent the dual fears of the Burgundian people, the tangible and the spiritual. One speaks to a hidden, physical danger that threatened the state's very foundation, while the other reflects the collective soul of a nation, weeping in anticipation of a tragedy it could feel but not prevent. Whether born of geological accident or mass emotion, both the sealed mine and the weeping Madonna became powerful symbols of a realm sensing its own imminent end, its wealth turning to dust and its faith dissolving into tears. Revenge is a story often told in whispers, not chronicles. From the smoldering ruins of a rebellious city, a lone figure emerged, his purpose honed to a single, deadly point. His name is lost to us now, known only by his origin and his mission, the Flemish assassin. He was a master of disguise, a man from Ghent who had seen his city crushed under the heel of Charles the Bold's army after a brutal revolt. His family, his livelihood, everything he knew had been erased in that calculated display of ducal power. His goal was not political change or the shifting of empires. It was a primal, personal vengeance against the man who had ordered that destruction. He did not seek to start a war, he sought to end a life. This required him to do the impossible, to walk directly into the lion's den. Using forged papers and a flawless impersonation of a minor Dutch noble, he gained entry to the court at Dijon. For weeks, he moved through the gilded halls, studying the Duke's routines, his guards, the rhythms of his life. He was a phantom, his hatred hidden behind a mask of polite submission, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came during a public procession in the castle's main courtyard. As Charles passed within a few feet of him, the assassin made his move. A blade, small and easily concealed, was drawn. But the plot was foiled not by a guard's vigilance but by pure chance. A woman in the crowd, startled by a horse, stumbled directly into the assassin's path, causing him to fumble the weapon. It clattered to the flagstones, and in that single, frozen second, his mission was over. Captured instantly, he was dragged to the darkest levels of the ducal dungeons. The interrogation that followed was predictably severe. The Duke's men were experts at extracting information, and they wanted to know who had sent him. They assumed a conspiracy, a plot by the French king or a rival Italian state. But through the pain, the man from Ghent held to a simple, shocking truth. He acted alone. He repeated the name of his city, the names of his dead, over and over. There were no co-conspirators, no grand design, only the raw, unsponsored fuel of a man wronged. This confession presented Charles the Bold with a profound dilemma. Here was not a political enemy, but a living consequence of his own ruthless policy. The expected response was execution, a public dismemberment to serve as a grim warning to any other would-be avengers. Yet Charles, a man not known for mercy, chose a different path. He spared the assassin's life. The official decree stated the man was to be exiled permanently, banished beyond the borders of Burgundy on pain of death. But court whispers suggested a more complex motive behind this unexpected clemency. Some believed Charles saw in the man a twisted reflection of his own fierce, unbending will. To execute him would be to deny the very principle of decisive action that Charles himself lived by. Others speculated that the Duke recognized the futility of killing one man for a crime committed by the state, understanding that such an act would only breed more of the same bitter hatred. The assassin vanished into exile, his story nearly erased from the record. His failed mission forces us to ask a difficult question. In a world of grand politics and dynastic wars, does a single person's pain truly matter? The Duke's surprising mercy suggests that perhaps even for the most powerful ruler, the answer can sometimes be yes. The silent, vengeful man from Ghent, in his failure, had managed to wound the Duke not with a blade but with a mirror. A single voice dared to sing what the court only whispered. In the final, frantic years of Charles the Bold's reign, a court minstrel whose name is lost to history composed a ballad that would become his death warrant. The song was a masterpiece of subtle treason, its lyrics wrapped in the elegant language of chivalric romance but carrying a razor's edge of critique. It did not shout its protest, it sang it, describing a noble knight so obsessed with forging a new kingdom that he failed to see the cracks widening in his own hall. The minstrel's true genius lay in his use of double meaning, where every reference to a broken shield could be heard as a failing alliance, and every lament for a barren field was understood as a treasury drained by endless war. He performed this dangerous piece only once, at a private gathering of nobles who were growing weary of Charles's ambitions. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some laughed uneasily, others fell into a stunned silence, but a few recognized the song for what it was, the most eloquent indictment of the Duke's policies ever uttered aloud. Word of the performance traveled swiftly through the palace's hidden passages, and it was not long before Charles himself was informed. The Duke, a man with no patience for dissent, especially when it was set to music, ordered the minstrel's arrest. The charge was sedition, the poisoning of morale at a time when unity was paramount. The trial was a swift and brutal formality. The minstrel was convicted and executed, his voice permanently silenced by the state he had dared to criticize. His instruments were burned, and every official copy of the ballad's lyrics was ordered destroyed. But a song is a living thing, far harder to kill than a man. The legend claims that one of the nobles present at that fateful performance, moved by the minstrel's courage, had secretly written down the lyrics. This single copy became the seed from which the ballad grew in the shadows. It was passed from hand to hand, transcribed in private diaries, and most importantly, memorized. The song went underground, becoming a secret anthem for the disillusioned. It traveled with the army, whispered by soldiers around campfires in the weeks leading up to the catastrophic battles of Morat and Nancy. Can you picture those final nights, the air cold and thick with anticipation? As professional soldiers sharpened their swords, they might have heard the faint, humming melody of a forbidden tune from a nearby tent. The song's lyrics, with their mournful depiction of a leader's hubris, would have resonated deeply with men who knew they were marching into a fight they were unlikely to win. It is impossible to measure the exact impact of a single ballad on the outcome of a war, but the erosion of belief is a powerful force. A soldier who questions the purpose of his sacrifice fights with a divided heart. The minstrel's last song, crafted in the glittering heart of the court, may have ultimately found its most powerful audience not among nobles, but in the ranks of the common soldiers, planting a seed of doubt that bloomed into defeat on the bloody fields that sealed Burgundy's fate. His story is a haunting reminder that the most dangerous weapon is sometimes not a sword, but a truth set to a memorable tune. Among the silks and conspiracies of the court, a treasonous whisper began to circulate, a rumor so dangerous it could never be written down. It suggested that a faction of Charles the Bold's own nobles, terrified by his relentless wars and the financial ruin they foresaw, entered into a secret pact with the very enemy he was marching to destroy, the Swiss Confederacy. This was not a betrayal born of ideology, but of cold, calculated self-preservation. These were men who saw the approaching storm and chose to sacrifice their duke to save their own lands and titles. The alleged communication would have been incredibly dangerous, passed through trusted merchants or sympathetic church officials who could travel between borders without suspicion. The intelligence offered was likely precise and devastating. Details of the Burgundian army's troop movements, its supply line vulnerabilities, and perhaps even the specific battle plans Charles intended to employ at Grandson and Morat. In exchange, the Swiss would have offered these traitors guarantees, promises that their personal estates would be spared the torch and sword when the Swiss armies advanced, and that their power would be recognized under whatever new order emerged. The impact of such a leak would have been catastrophic. At the Battle of Morat, the Swiss forces did not merely meet Charles in the field. They executed a flawless and preemptive maneuver, exploiting a weakness in his deployment that he believed was hidden. They attacked through terrain he considered impassable, and they seemed to anticipate his every countermove. This is the kind of tactical advantage that can only come from perfect intelligence, from knowing the enemy's hand before the cards are even played. Could such a conspiracy have remained hidden? In the paranoid world of the late Burgundian court, where everyone watched everyone else, it is plausible that the plotters were few, powerful, and impeccably discreet. Their greatest protection was the chaos of the final collapse. With Charles dead and the state dismantled, there was no one left to investigate, no loyal spymaster to connect the dots. The Swiss, for their part, would have had every reason to bury the truth, to let their stunning military victory stand on its own merits rather than be tarnished by whispers of a bought triumph. The surviving members of the alleged faction would have seamlessly integrated into the new Habsburg administration, their secret safe, their lands intact. This theory forces us to confront a difficult historical possibility. The fall of the Burgundian Duchy may not have been a simple story of military defeat, but a death from within, a calculated assassination by those who were meant to be its staunchest defenders. The final battles were not just lost on the field, they were lost in the shadowed corridors of power, where fear proved a more potent loyalty than any oath to a crown. A whisper of blood, not battle, may have been the final undoing of the Burgundian line. Hidden within a private correspondence from a minor court official to a relative, there is a fleeting, almost careless mention of a young man, a certain Antoine de Burgundy, who enjoyed the personal favor of Duke Charles the Bold. The letter notes the Duke's unusual interest in the boy's education and military training, a level of patronage far exceeding what was typical for a distant, middling noble. This single, obscure reference is the fragile thread from which historians have pulled the possibility of Charles's illegitimate son. In an era where lineage was everything, the existence of a male child, even one born out of wedlock, would have thrown the entire succession into a different light. While his legitimate daughter, Mary, was the undisputed heir, a son, a direct male descendant of the fierce Charles the Bold, would have presented a powerful, if controversial, alternative. Supporters of a strong, independent Burgundy, those who feared absorption by France or the Habsburgs, might have rallied around this young man. He could have become a figurehead, a focal point for resistance, a living symbol of the old ducal blood refusing to be diluted. His very presence would have given the Burgundian nobility a choice, a chance to fight for a duke of their own blood rather than accept a foreign prince through marriage. So why was his story, if true, so thoroughly erased? The answer is a matter of cold political calculus. For Mary of Burgundy, her claim to the vast inheritance had to be pristine, uncomplicated by a rival, even a bastard half-brother. For her husband, the Archduke Maximilian of Habsburg, the boy represented a dangerous wild card, a potential spark for a civil war that could shatter the duchy before he could even secure it. And for the King of France, Louis XI, who was eagerly picking apart the Burgundian lands, a unified resistance led by a son of Charles the Bold was his worst nightmare. It was in the interest of all the major powers, the Habsburgs, the French crown, and even Mary's own advisors, to ensure this story never left the shadows. Antoine de Burgundy was quietly pensioned off, given a minor title far from the centers of power, and his connection to the ducal house was systematically scrubbed from the official record. The suppression was so complete that we are left only with a ghost in the archives, a name in a forgotten letter. This raises a haunting counterfactual. What if this son had been acknowledged? Could a male heir with the backing of the old Burgundian guard have marshaled the resources to withstand the French onslaught and preserve the duchy's independence? Or would his claim have simply hastened the internal collapse, fracturing the state from within? The story of the lost heir is ultimately a story of a road not taken, a silent what if that hangs over the fall of Burgundy, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful forces in history are the possibilities that were never allowed to breathe. The final tale belongs not to a warrior or a schemer, but to the woman who inherited a collapsing world. Mary of Burgundy, the last duchess, carried the weight of her father's shattered ambitions on her young shoulders. Her reign was brief, a desperate scramble to hold the duchy together against foreign kings and internal betrayal. But her sudden death in a hunting accident in 1482 felt less like a tragedy and more like a final, suspicious convenience. The official story was straightforward. Her horse stumbled on a muddy path, throwing her into a ditch where she suffered fatal internal injuries. Yet whispers immediately began to circulate that this was no accident. The most persistent rumor suggests Mary herself had a premonition of the danger. Courtiers later recalled her unusual melancholy in the days before the hunt, a sense of resignation that seemed out of place for a young woman known for her vitality. She was said to have spoken cryptically of securing her son's future, as if she knew she would not be there to see it herself. This has led to the chilling theory that Mary was aware of a plot against her life, a conspiracy by nobles who saw her marriage to the Habsburg Archduke as the final surrender of Burgundian independence and wanted her out of the way to forge a different political future. Did she ride out that day knowing the path was sabotaged, or that a specific rider in her party had been paid to cause a fatal mishap? Her quiet despair could be read as the terrible burden of knowing her fate and feeling powerless to stop it. This speculation is fueled by the legend of a hidden document. In the chaotic hours after her death, her most loyal lady-in-waiting insisted the Duchess had secreted away a final testament, a private will or a letter of warning meant only for her infant son, Philip. This was not the official state document, but something far more personal and politically explosive. It was rumored to contain her true wishes for the governance of Burgundy, perhaps even naming the individuals she suspected of plotting against her. A frantic search of her private chambers and personal effects began, but nothing was ever found. The existence of this lost document hangs over the entire Burgundian story as the ultimate unanswered question. What truths did it hold? Did it reveal the names of the traitors she feared? Could it have provided instructions for preserving the duchy's independence, a roadmap lost to history? Its absence allowed the official narrative, controlled by the victorious powers, to stand unchallenged. The Habsburgs consolidated their rule, and the French king picked apart the Burgundian territories, all without the complication of a dead duchess's final, damning words. So we are left with a profound and haunting silence. Did Mary of Burgundy take the last great secret of her house to her grave, or does that final document still lie hidden, waiting to be found in a forgotten chest or behind a loose stone in a castle wall, holding the truth about the day the last duchess fell? These 25 stories are more than just forgotten footnotes. They form a secret history, a mosaic of fear and ambition that explains the duchy's glittering rise and its sudden, catastrophic fall far better than any battle map or treaty ever could. When you piece them together, a pattern emerges. This was not a state that fell solely to Swiss pikes or Habsburg marriages. It was a state already hollowed out from within, its foundations weakened by paranoia, its leaders haunted by prophecies and curses, and its people caught between divine omens and earthly betrayals. The vanished crown was not just a theft, it was a symbol of stolen legitimacy. The weeping Madonna and the silent bell were the spiritual cries of a realm sensing its doom. The ghost army and the alchemist's perfect gold were the fantasies and desperate hopes of a culture staring into the abyss. Even the architecture of power was built on secrets, with spies in the walls and traitors in the inner circle. What these tales reveal is the true engine of history, the human heart with all its messy, irrational, and passionate drives. The dates of battles and the terms of succession are the skeleton of the past, but these whispered stories are its flesh and blood. They give us the fear in a courtier's eyes, the weight of a broken promise, the chilling silence after a minstrel's last song. To understand why Burgundy collapsed, you must look beyond the battlefield and into the haunted corridors of its own palace, where every shadow held a secret and every reflection might have been a duke's doppelganger. This collective psyche, steeped in superstition and shadow play, made the duchy uniquely vulnerable. A ruler who fears a cursed piece of gold might hesitate at a crucial moment. An army that hums a ballad of dissent marches with less conviction. A nobility that plots in secret has already surrendered its unity. The legacy of these shadows is the realization that empires are not just won and lost by soldiers, but by the beliefs, the fears, and the hidden loyalties of the people within them. The fall of Burgundy becomes not a sudden event, but the final, inevitable act in a long tragedy where the real battles were fought in the human soul long before the first arrow was ever loosed. The whispers of the past have painted a portrait far richer than any official chronicle could ever capture. From a crown that dissolved into thin air to a prophecy etched on a dying flower, these 25 tales reveal that the true story of Burgundy was written not in ink but in shadow. We have walked alongside phantom armies and decoded the secret letters of a duchess, stood in the silent workshop of a vanished alchemist, and heard the last treacherous song of a court minstrel. Each mystery, a single thread, weaves together to form a tapestry of a realm perpetually balanced on the edge of a knife, its grandeur forever undercut by an almost palpable sense of impending doom. This was not a dynasty that simply fell. It was one that seemed to unravel from the inside, haunted by its own splendor. The legacy of the Burgundian Duchy, therefore, is not found in its battlefields or its treaties, but in these lingering echoes. It challenges us to see history not as a series of dry facts and dates, but as a grand, ongoing detective story, filled with cold cases and unsolved riddles waiting for a fresh pair of eyes. The archives are still full of silent letters, and the landscapes still hold their buried secrets. What we have uncovered here is merely the beginning. The past is not dead, it is simply waiting for the right question to be asked. Now we turn the investigation over to you. What is the historical mystery that captivates your imagination? Do you have a theory about the lost Burgundian crown or the fate of the Duke's illegitimate son? Share your own enigmas and ideas in the comments below, and if you're ready to join us on the next journey into the untold past, be sure to subscribe. The shadows are deep, and there are always more stories to uncover.